Okay, hi. Welcome to the third video in my series. It's really excited to be here. If you hadn't worked it out by now, the series is on the ER101 sequencer and its partner, the ER102. Sorry it's been so long since this second one. The reason is that I had to take pretty much my entire synthesizer to the people who were making the case, which cases I now have here, and so half of it I had to take all the modules out, and then the other half actually had to go to them with them in for various reasons. I won't get into it now, but anyway, so I was spent a nervy more than a week away from my precious synthesizer. Was glad to get it back and put everything back in. That took a long time. So great to be back finally with my lovely modules, and great to be back with you guys looking again at the ER101. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I really want to talk about tables. Tables are such a big part of this. It's called an indexed quad sequencer, and this indexed bit is a huge part of why it's so cool. But before we get to talk about the tables, I want to talk about another of its awesome functions, which we've already touched on a bit, math. So I just want to go over that and get that sorted out so we know all about that and how it works, because that will make everything else easier, because we can use that all the time to get the sequencer into the state we want. Okay, so it's still got the sequence in it from last time. Let's just hear that. Make sure I've got the delay off this time. So this is not a very exciting sequence. The reason I have the delay on, and I have to keep remembering to turn it off, is it just sounds nicer with it on, right? Have a bit of drums. This is more interesting than that sequence on its own. So maybe we'll come back to that. Oh, that's going to take ages to die away now. Let's pause it. Okay, so that's a sequence. Now let's say we want to do some stuff to it to make it more interesting. Well, there's lots of different ways we can do that, and math is one of the nice easy ones. So how does it work? When you hold this down, this represents a transformation that will happen when I let go. And if you're ever not certain what's going to happen, you can hit delete, which is nice and easy to do with one hand. This is now like the unit transformation that won't do anything. So if I let go, nothing would happen. So let's actually hear that. This is, I can keep doing this and nothing happens. So what can we do that makes something actually happen? Well, we can affect any of the four parameters, and the effect hits what we have selected. So I've got the track selected, so my transform is going to apply to the whole track. We learned about tracks and patterns and steps in the previous videos. If I had the pattern selected, it would just do this pattern or this step. But let's do the whole track. So really obvious thing to do, subtract an octave. Easy. I turn down this and it's gone to A minus, because that's minus. When it's at 0, it's adding nothing. It just adds an amount to the index here, the CV value that's actually playing. So this will add 12. And we could do half an octave. See, and I pressed it again there, and it did it again. Now, if you hold it down and hit invert, if you have the ER102, it switches it to the opposite transform. So let's put this back into octaves. Oh dear. It's hay fever, you see. Another reason why I delayed the video, but it's got me anyway. Alright, where was I? So this is adding octave. Now, we did that before. What else can we do with maths? Well, these ones on the duration, this G is for multiplication. So we select that. Now everything is twice as long, and if we go, so that's underneath like that, that's division. And we can do the same thing to the gate lengths. And if I invert, you'll see those go down because that's now divide by 2. Do that again. Okay, now you don't have to accept this default that we're going to add things to the CVA and CVB and multiply these. You can do both or one or the other on all 4 of these, and you do that by changing it here. But this is when you start to sort of feel that holding this down is becoming a bit of a drag. So in order to not have to hold it down, you can hit this up here that's offering you pin. And now I can let go of that, tailor the transform as I want. If I hit math again, it would apply it. If I hit done, it wouldn't apply it, but it would still keep it here ready for me to hit math and apply it. Simples. So what sort of things we can do, as I was talking about. We've got add, multiply, random. Now what random does is it sets just to a random value between 0 and the value you pick here, and that replaces the value. This one is jitter, which is similar to random, but it adds it or subtracts a value to the value that's already there. So you could jitter just a little bit. So let's just do this jitter by 1. Well, let's do 2 actually. So a random number between 2 and -2 will get added to all my pitches, and it will start to sound weird. So if I hit done, as I say, nothing happens until we hit math. And we can keep jittering. And because I only jittered by a little amount, like the sort of shape of our melody is still there, but it now sounds a lot funkier. So let's load our snapshot again and get it back up to the higher register, just like we... Oop, I need to hit that again. There we go. Add the octave. See how useful that is? So let's go over all the things we can do again. So add, multiply, random sets to a completely random value, jitter moves it a random amount. This is the last one, and this is quantize. And what that does is it sets it to the closest multiple of whatever you put here. So quantize by 1 won't do anything, but quantize by an octave see, we've gone to the closest octave. So again, let's load the snapshot. I'm reflexively hitting that, but don't have to. So yeah, and that's again, remember I did this back to where I want it, and then I can set that back to Unity. Now there's another trick you can do with math. It has one little thing up its last thing up its sleeve. So let's pin this again. So you should note that you can do all of these things, right? I could add 12 and jitter it, you see, and if I go back to add, it's still adding 12 and jittering, which leads us to a useful thing, if we clear it, that if we multiply it by 0, that means that value is always 0. And then if we add something to that, it will all get set to that value. So that's useful, and you see that A actually turns into an S to show this. Useful for resetting everything to a specific value. So this will set everything to 1 note. Let's load the snapshot again. I really should have just saved this in the register I wanted it in. But that just shows you how quick that is, right? So that set can be particularly useful for the CVB value. So put that down to 0. That becomes S. So the CVB I've got set to the the tone via the filter cutoff and part of the wave folder here on this sound. So if we set it all to 0, and let's set it to a nice high value. You see how this is like so quick and produces a nice musical result with something just as simple as this. Again, I can turn my delay on. And hear it with some drums. And of course we can apply it to just the pattern. So let's have this one set low, pattern 2 set a bit higher, 3 a bit higher still, and 4. So there you go, that's math, and you can use it for some zany things with the durations, of course. Let's put this back on, delete the transform again. So what if we jittered the duration? I might want to check what I'm on. Yeah, let's do the whole track. So in again. So that's sort of drunken the sequence, and it won't be in time with the drums anymore. But I only jittered it a little bit, so it's not far off. Actually, now it's worth mentioning a little trick that I meant to mention in all the other videos, which is if you've got pattern selected and you hold it down, it shows you the total duration of the pattern there. And this is not a full bar, so it's gonna get out. So let's load the snapshot again. Now all my patterns are 72. So that's a really useful thing, especially if you've recorded patterns or whatever. We'll get onto that. But even when you're just putting them in, right? Okay, so I think we've covered math. Hopefully we're familiar enough with all the different bits, and you can follow on what I'm doing, using it to quickly just go, oh yeah, I want this higher up, higher up again. Oh, I only did one pattern there, you see. So we want to undo what I did, invert, and then go to track, invert again, and we're back up here. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if, you know, all my CV values were different for the tone? Oh, we can do that. Oops, I hit it by mistake there. Adjust there. Right. So we want these to be random between 0 and 44. And we get a nice funky result. Enough drums. So that's math. So now we've covered math, it's really time to conquer these tables. So I'm going to talk about tables in this video, and I'm going to show you a few things you can just quickly do with the sequencer. And not just quickly, you know, cool things you can do with it. And then in another part of this video, or the next video, one could say. Excuse me. I brought some water this time. Ha 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 ha. Genius, right. Oh, hopefully my voice doesn't sound quite as awful now. Yes, where was it? Tables. Yeah, in another video, the next video, I'm going to show you some things you can do if you've got the EL102 and you can load some of your own tables into it with the SD card. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's just talk about tables. So I keep talking about them. Come on, Vic, what are they? Well, as we've alluded to, when we set these CV values, this number does not represent a pitch. It shows you the pitch up there. So you could say, oh yeah, well, 35 is B2. But that's because there's a table that has these numbers that map to these voltage values, which represent pitches. And you can have different tables, and you can modify the tables. In fact, modifying the table is as easy as hitting that button, that mystery button we haven't pressed yet, and now we can go through the indices, pick number 35, and modify it. So now 35 isn't a B anymore, now it's a C or a C sharp. And if you are in this mode, you can change it in small increments. So there's an obvious use for that, which is if you're using an oscillator which doesn't track pitch correctly across the entire range of what you want to play with the sequencer. That's like the obvious thing to do with that. So let's play again. In fact, let's reload the snapshot so we know we're happy with what's happening. We've heard this a million times, but it's kind of grown on me. Let's practice our math and put it up a bit higher. I need to be back here, right? Shall we save the snapshot now? Just there we go. They don't have to keep doing that. Right. So there's 36. We keep seeing a lot of times, right? So let's go to 36 and just detune it. Now, we could be actually tuning it here, right? The oscillator could be slightly out, and we could be tuning it. I mean, that's most likely to happen on the high value, right? 48. So let's go over to 48. Say that just sounds slightly flat to us. Next, there, hear that? We can tune that back down. And those tables are part of the track information. So there's a table for CV-A and a table separately for CV-B for each track. And you'll notice this switch, and you know, for me this switch was a bit of a mystery for a while. I just knew that life was difficult if it was in this position. But this is what it's for. It's here we're looking at table A, here we're looking at table B. And in the middle we're looking at the reference tables, which are the kind of inbuilt tables. And the table you get when you initialize it is this one, 12 ET. And that means 12 tone equal temperament. And if you don't know what that means, you've not done enough music theory for that. Very, very briefly, the Western scale in an octave splits it up into 12 tones which are equally spread out. And so on a piano keyboard, if you hold your hands over an octave, C to C, and then count the notes, you'll find that there's 12. And they're all equally apart. But that's not the only way to tune. There are other ways you can tune. You could just pick a different number to split them up into. And there are some tables in here which let us do that. If we have a look through here, you'll actually find there's a 24 ET table. So how do we use that? Well, it's easy, right? We know how things work on the sequencer from before. We know about these inserts and copies and things. So in fact, all we need to do is hit copy. That's copied the 24 ET table. Pop up to table A, insert. And now we have a different table. You notice it's gone much lower. Not because I with the snapshot, excuse my language, but because there's, in an octave, now there's 24 pitches, not 12, so everything is kind of scrunched down in the table. There are 100 0 to 99 values in each table, which makes sense, right? We've only got 2 digits there. Easy. So this is a kind of weird scale, right? And in fact we could use math to, you need to be on the track, to experience a bit more of this. So that's, if we add 24 this time, it will take it up by an octave. And let's jitter it a bit instead. So take this one to jitter. Let's jitter by half an octave, shall we? So we're actually hearing pitches here which are smaller, than ordinary scales. There are other sequencers that can do this microtonal stuff, but I don't know of any that are quite as flexible as this, because you can put absolutely anything you want in that table. So I could, in fact I will load my snapshot again because I jittered it there. And we've gone back to the table we're familiar with. So, these reference tables are pretty cool. I mean, let's have another look at another reference table, right? Let's, because especially if you've got the EL102, there's lots of these. So we could pick one like an Egyptian scale. So we'll copy that, insert. So it doesn't sound, well, there's a little difference. So what could we do to experience a bit more of the scale? Let's do that jittering again, right? Well, let's just do a straight up random 24. Because there are fewer tones in this scale, picking these completely random scales gets you sort of more musical results. So it's a bit like using a quantizer to restrict the notes in the scale, but you can do it here just with the table. So that's you know, like the next thing you can do with tables, you know, the sort of obvious things. But it's even more flexible than that, because you can put any values in that table that you want. And this is why in the next video we're going to go over like making custom tables on the computer, because dialing them in can take a while, but there's still some fun things we can do. So, for example, let's use math. I'm on the track yet. And let's do that set operation that I mentioned, where we divide by 0 and then set. So let's set every CV value to 0. Done. Alright, so this is just going to be very low. But let's go over to our table. Let's use the course control here. See, now notice we can like sequence all the notes which are 0. So let's put this one to C there, C2. And let's go to track 2 and set everything to 1, and track pattern 3, set everything to 2, and pattern 4 set to 3. Now let's go back to our table. So we've set this bottom one to C2. Let's set this, oops. I changed one of the steps, but it doesn't matter. Let's change this one to, I don't know, but F. We'll do this one. So you see, we're changing all those values at once. And there's lots of different ways you can use this for interesting effects. Let's set everything back to 1 again, to 0 again. So now everything is 0. And let's go through the steps instead and increment each one. Let's go to the beginning to do this. So, in fact, let's even just set the step and the CV to the same value, because then it's really easy to know what we're doing. Right? So that's 1, 2. Nearly there. So the highest we got to there was 6. So now we can play these, right? Let's make this one. I'm changing one thing again. There we go. Let's make this one C. So whilst we just change one value, for example, the first step, we're actually changing the first pattern in the table, the second actually. We're changing a note in every pattern, right? If I make this one really high, we change that in every pattern. So that's like a completely different way of playing the sequencer, if you like. Now there's so much you can do with these tables, especially when you've got the math function, and how those tables can literally have any values in them, and you can load them in yourself. So I'm going to do a follow-up video just of things we can do with tables. Come up with as many as possible. So if you have a favourite thing you've done with tables that I may have not thought of, then put it in a comment or something, or otherwise let me know, and I will put that in the video. So we're going to see just how many things we can do with tables and with math, and that's before we get onto anything over here like groups. So hope you've enjoyed the second video. Let's play out with some drums.